He thought they were dead, buried, lost to fire, blood, and time. But 3 years later, on a forgotten highway under a dying sun, he heard their voices, singing on the back of a passing bus. What came next didn't just shatter his heart. It tore apart everything he thought was true. Let us know in the comments where you were when you watched this. And if these stories speak to you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Now, sit back, breathe deep, and lose yourself in the story. They say the desert don't take sides, but that ain't true. It sides with death. And death, well, it nearly got her. I found her the way you find broken things in the desert, quiet, half-covered in wind-blown dust, forgotten by the world and the men who'd rather pretend she never existed. She looked like she'd been poured out of the sky and left to dry. Torn dress, bruised skin, lips cracked like the basin floor. One boot on, the other missing. I didn't know her name. Still don't know much, even now. That morning, the wind was howling through the mesquite like it had bones to pick, and I was 3 miles outside San Jero with a shovel in my hand and a pine box in the back of my wagon. They paid me to bury her. $4. Said the heat got her. Said she was already gone. But when I looked down at that girl, lying in the sun with flies buzzing around her face like undertakers, something in me paused. Something old. Something I'd buried years back with my wife and the child we never got to meet. I thought I was done feeling things. I thought I was done caring. But her fingers moved just barely, and I dropped the damn shovel like it was red-hot iron. I ain't proud to admit it, but I stumbled backward like I'd seen a ghost. Took a long breath, tried to blame it on the wind or my tired eyes. But no, she breathed, shallow, struggling, but alive. They told me to bury her. I loaded her back into the wagon instead. Didn't go to no doctor. Town was 5 miles behind me and full of folks who'd rather mind their own business than ask the wrong question. I brought her to the ranch, if you could still call it that. Mostly dirt and rotting fence posts now. Place hadn't been whole since the fire, but it was all I had. And now it was all she had too. She didn't wake the first night. I cleaned her up as best I could, bucket water and old cotton rags. Laid her on the cot in the back room where the dust was thick and the air was still. She was feverish, sweating through the blanket like she was trying to melt right out of her skin. I stayed up. Couldn't sleep, not with that kind of breath coming out of her chest, rattling like old bones. She had something dark under her skin, something more than sunstroke, but it wasn't my place to name it. I just kept the kettle on and waited. By morning, the fever broke, and her eyes opened, pale green, the color of snake grass in spring, and wild, like she was looking through me at something miles away. She didn't speak, just blinked and blinked again like she was trying to believe her own breathing. I gave her water, slow. She drank like it hurt, then went back to sleep. She didn't belong to anyone, that much I figured. No ring, no papers, no one came asking, and she sure as hell didn't belong in a hole in the ground. I spent the next 2 days waiting for something, anything. A knock on the door, a shout from the ridge, a wanted poster blowing in with the wind. But nothing came, just heat, dry as judgment. Then, on the third night, I caught her sitting up, barely, her back against the wall. I hadn't seen her move all day. Now she was looking at me like I was a question she didn't trust the answer to. "You're safe," I said, though I didn't know if it was true. She didn't respond, just looked past me. Then, finally, she said the first thing. I wasn't supposed to survive. Her voice was thin, like wind through broken boards, but the words were solid. That was when I knew this wasn't no accident. Someone had left her to die, and not because they'd run out of mercy. She told me pieces over the next few nights. Not all at once, not clearly, but enough. Enough to know she'd taken something. Not money, not gold, something heavier, something that could burn a man down from the inside. She called it a ledger, said it held names, payments, land claims, said it proved things that were never meant to be proven, said she took it from a man who owned more than land, he owned fear, and he wasn't going to let it go easy. That man had a name, and even whispered, It tasted like ash. Royce Ketter, cattle baron, railroad investor, and the kind of man who could make bodies disappear with a handshake. I'd heard his name before, always in the same breath as trouble. She stole from him, not just the ledger, but truth. And in a place like this, truth is worth killing for. I should have turned her in. That's what any man with half a brain would have done. But I ain't been half a man in years. And when I looked at her skin still pale, breath still uncertain, I saw more than just a fugitive. I saw a soul that had clawed its way back from the grave. You don't bury that. You protect it. So I put a rifle by the door, started sleeping light, taught her how to hold a pistol without flinching. She picked it up fast. Quicker than I liked, truth be told. Made me think she wasn't new to danger, just new to being believed. We said little. That was easier. Words had weight, and we both carried enough already. Still, there were moments, quiet ones, where I caught her watching the sunset like it was a thing she didn't think she'd see again. And I felt it too. Like life was something borrowed. Like death was still circling, just waiting for us to blink. I didn't know what was coming. Not yet. But the dogs always find the scent eventually. And the past? It rides fast in the desert. The first sign came with the buzzards. Not circling overhead, but standing still on the ridge, like statues carved by the wind. 3 of them, black-feathered, beady-eyed, watching the house like they knew something was about to die. I watched them too, long past when most men would have gone back inside. Something in me didn't trust the quiet anymore. The desert has a way of warning you. If you're willing to listen, the animals always know before the bullets start flying. That morning I found a boot print in the dirt near the back fence. Fresh, wide set, too heavy for her, too clean for a drifter. Whoever it was, they didn't knock, just looked, maybe waited, then left. Or circled. I started locking the barn, double-checking the windows. The wind carried strange things now, whispers you couldn't name, hoofbeats that vanished before you could place them. She noticed too. Her eyes tracked shadows even when they didn't move. By the end of that week, she wasn't just healing. She was remembering. Names, places, pieces of a puzzle she'd ripped apart in the dark and scattered across the desert. Her voice was stronger now, sharper, and every word she said came wrapped in caution. Royce doesn't let go, she told me one night, watching the fire crackle in the hearth. He doesn't forgive. Not when what you took can burn him to the ground. I asked her about the ledger again, the one she buried. She nodded, slow, like digging it up might summon more than just old pages. Said it was hidden out near Dry Creek, beneath a false cairn under the shade of a rock shaped like a coffin. You don't forget places like that, she said. You dream them. We made a plan, not much of one. Ride out at first light, retrieve the ledger, bring it back, then I don't know, maybe send it to the territorial marshal in Yuma, maybe burn it ourselves, maybe just survive. But the desert had its own plan. That night, just past midnight, I heard the coyote howl. Sharp, close. Then came the silence. Not peace. Not quiet. The kind of silence that follows a scream too loud for sound. I stepped outside, rifle in hand, and saw them. 3 riders, just silhouettes against the moon. Long dusters, wide hats. One carried a lantern swinging low from his saddle, painting gold on the sand with every step. They didn't approach. Just stood at the tree line, still as bone markers. Watching. I didn't call out. Didn't need to. They weren't the type that came for a chat. They were measuring us. Measuring the house. The distance to the door, the speed of the wind, the kind of men who counted bullets before breathing. I stood there for a full minute, didn't blink, didn't move. Just let them see I wasn't green, that I knew what this was, and what it might cost. Then the man with the lantern raised one hand, tipped his hat, and they rode off. Not fast, not in a hurry, but the message was clear. We see you. We know. Soon. I didn't sleep that night. She didn't either. We sat on the porch until the sky bled orange. The air between us held a weight too heavy for words. I thought about running, about saddling the horses and disappearing west until the names stopped following. But she shook her head. "No more running," she said, voice low, steady. There was a steel in her now, not the kind that clangs and shines, the quiet kind, forged in the belly of fear and cooled in silence. I nodded. So I got to work, reinforced the door, oiled every hinge, sharpened every blade, dug a trench behind the barn and stashed extra cartridges in mason jars under the floorboards. I wired the bell above the front gate with a tension line and scattered broken glass in the dust near the porch steps. If they came, I wanted every step to be their last. She helped, dug with her hands, loaded shells, set traps, never once flinched. This wasn't about fear anymore. This was about earning survival. I'd almost forgotten what that felt like, having something worth fighting for. Someone. Then came the telegram. Delivered by a boy too young to carry this kind of weight. No sender name, just a few words, etched in ink like a scar. You took what wasn't yours. Return it or burn with it. R.K. She read it once, then again. Then she burned it in the hearth without blinking. That night, she told me everything. Not just about the ledger, but what came before. She was born in a mining camp outside Santa Rosalia. Dirt floors, thin stew, brothers with empty eyes. Her mother died when she was 10. Her father sold her off when she was 14. She ran. Ended up working kitchens, then saloons. Spent a year in Royce Ketter's estate as a guest of his sister. That was where she met Royce. That was where it all started. He was charming, until he wasn't. Generous, until you said no. Said he loved her. Said he'd build her a life. What he built was a cage with velvet curtains. She saw his books one night. Unlocked. Wide open. Maybe he thought she was too broken to care. Maybe he wanted her to see, to know the kind of monster he really was. She didn't tell anyone. She just waited. Then, one night, she took the ledger, saddled his prized gelding, and rode until the wind tore the breath from her lungs. She made it 3 days before the storm hit. Passed out near the ridge west of Dry Creek. Someone found her, left her, assumed the desert would finish what Royce started. But the desert chose different that day. And so did I. Now, here we were, two strangers bound by a single dangerous choice, standing still while the storm circled. I asked her what she wanted to do. She looked me square in the eyes. Fight. And so we would. We left before the sun touched the ridgeline. No words, just saddle leather creaking and wind dragging its fingers through the brush like it was trying to wake the dead. I carried the rifle. She carried the map in her head. Dry Creek wasn't on any chart worth its ink. It was a name whispered by ranchers and outlaws alike, more rumor than place. Half of it dried up in the drought of '86. The other half faded with the miners who gave up digging for gold and started digging graves instead. We crossed the Arroyo del Diablo by mid-morning. The water was low, more mud than stream, and the banks were scarred by hooves that didn't belong to wild mustangs. Someone had passed through recently. Maybe a scouting party. Maybe worse. Still, we pressed on. The land changed as we rode. Hills rose like the spines of ancient beasts, buried beneath sand and ash. The wind grew sharper, meaner, like it knew where we were headed and didn't much care for it. By noon, we reached the ridge. It looked like nothing at first, just another outcropping of stone and bone-dry brush. But as we climbed, I saw the shape she described, the rock curved like a coffin lid, half shaded by a dead juniper that hadn't borne fruit since Lincoln wore boots. She dismounted first. Walked slow, like every step was a test. I didn't ask questions, just kept watch. She knelt beside the cairn, a pile of stones so carefully arranged. It might as well have been a headstone, and started pulling the rocks away one by one. Her hands didn't shake. Not until she hit wood. Wrapped in canvas, tied with rusted wire, the bundle looked more like a trap than a treasure. She opened it carefully, eyes flicking to the horizon like she expected a bullet to come flying out of nowhere. Inside, a leather-bound ledger, thick and worn. Pages marked with ink so faded it looked like dried blood. Names, places, sums, signatures. And one name at the top of every third page. Royce Ketter. It wasn't just a book. It was a death sentence depending on who held it. She didn't speak as she tucked it into her satchel, just nodded once, stood, and turned to mount up. But the silence broke before she could swing her leg over the saddle. A cough. Dry, forced. Then, a voice like gravel dragged across steel. Was wondering how long it'd take you. I spun, rifle raised, but too late. 3 men. Not the ones from the ridge days ago, these were new. One tall, thin as a fence post with eyes like spoiled milk. One heavyset, scar on his throat like someone once tried to silence him and almost succeeded. And one in a black hat too clean for this kind of dust. They weren't out for conversation. I stood between her and them. Didn't need to look back to know her hand was already near her side. Didn't come to hurt you, the tall one said. Came to watch you work. Orders. The heavy one said quietly, rubbing his neck. I didn't answer. Just kept my aim steady. The man in the black hat chuckled. Took a step closer. She got it then? He asked, nodding to the satchel. You know what that means, don't you? I did. It meant we weren't going home. It meant this desert wasn't just sand anymore. It was the whole battle ahead. What happened next was a blur. Shots rang out. Dust swirled. The air thickened with tension. I struck the tall one first shoulder. He dropped his weapon but didn't cry out. Just looked at me like I'd broken some unspoken rule. The heavy one reached for his rifle, but she stopped him quickly. One shot, and he went down. The man in the black hat moved fast and cold. His shot barely missed me. Mine caught him off balance. He stumbled, fired wildly. Then, silence again. Only the tall one was still moving. Crawling backward, eyes wide, no smugness left. He didn't beg or shout, just looked at her like she was some story come to life. She walked up slowly, gun still ready. I told him someone would come, she whispered. I just didn't think it'd be you. He couldn't reply. She didn't fire. She turned, climbed on her horse, and rode away. I followed. We rode in silence. The sun was low when we reached the valley's edge. I saw the ranch house, dark against the sky. It looked smaller, fragile. I asked if she still wanted to fight. She looked at the ledger, then at her hands, and said something I won't forget. I don't want revenge. I want the truth to matter. That night, I buried 2 near the ridge, marked their resting place with stones. Said nothing. The desert doesn't answer prayers, but I said one anyway. Not for them. For us. Because I knew next time Royce came, he wouldn't send watchers. He'd come himself. And this time, we wouldn't be the ones digging. The wind changed the day we returned. Not just its direction, its sound, like it dragged something heavy behind it. Something mean. The house was as we left it. Porch sagging, shutters rattling. But it felt different. Smaller. Like it knew what was coming. I unsaddled the horses and let them loose in the pen. Didn't tie the gate. If needed, they deserved a chance. She didn't speak much. Unwrapped the ledger, checked every name, traced the weight of every sin inked in it. Some men still alive, some buried under stolen earth, but all tied to Royce. She spread the pages on the table, lit the lamps, and copied each quietly. Her hands steady. Mine shook just watching. I boarded the windows, reinforced the door with scrap iron and nails, filled flasks and barrels with well water, dug a shallow trench around the porch, filled with lamp oil, just in case. I wasn't planning to burn the place, but I wouldn't lose it easy. That night, a stranger came. We heard hoofbeats first. Just one horse, riding slow, confident, like the rider knew how the night would end. She stayed inside, gun ready, breathing steady. I stepped onto the porch with my rifle. He was young, younger than expected, maybe 25. Clean coat, polished boots, but his eyes of a man who'd seen worse than death and never blinked. Had didn't draw a weapon. Just looked at me like weighing a choice. "You Caleb?" he asked. I didn't answer. "I'm not here to fight. Just a message." He reached into his coat slow and dropped a folded paper in the dirt between us, then turned and rode away without a word. I waited a minute before picking it up. The ink was neat, slanted. It smelled like cigar smoke and perfume, meaning Royce hadn't just sent it, he sealed it himself. "You've made your choice, Caleb. I'll make mine. Burn the book, hand over the girl, and walk away. No blood, no grudge, just the desert between us. You've got 3 days. Then the fire comes. RK." I didn't show her the note. Not that night. What was the point? We both knew Royce wasn't the bargaining type. We sat out under the stars, neither of us speaking, just watching the sky unravel into embers. The stars felt closer than usual, like they were listening. I wanted to say something, anything, but she beat me to it. "When I was 13, she said, I watched a man bury a dog alive because it barked too loud. She didn't look at me when she said it, just stared at the sky like it owed her something. He smiled while he did it. Said it was better for everyone. I didn't ask if that man was Royce. Didn't need to. I remember thinking, if no one stops him, he'll keep doing it. And he did. Her voice was flat, not broken, just tired of being silent. "And now I wonder," she whispered, "if that's all evil really is. Just what happens when no one pulls the trigger." She looked at me then. Really looked. "Will you?" It wasn't a question about violence. Not really. It was about choice, about standing still when it mattered. I nodded, and she nodded back. The next day, we rode into town. Not for help. That well had long since run dry. But I needed supplies. Ammo. More oil. 2 spools of wire and a crate of nails. The clerk gave me side-eye, but didn't ask. I paid in silver and took the change without speaking. On our way out, a man bumped into her. On purpose. One of Royce's. Didn't draw. Just stared. Smiled. Walked on. She didn't flinch. Neither did I. But we both knew. The clock had started ticking. We rode hard back to the ranch, faster than we should have. Dust trailed behind like a fuse. I kept looking back, half expecting a thunder of hooves to roll in behind us. But they didn't come that day. Not yet. She finished copying the ledger that night, folded the pages, wrapped them in oilskin, and sealed them in a jar. Buried it under the chicken coop while I stood watch. She left the original on the table. A trap. Let them come for it. We slept in shifts. I took first. At some point, just before dawn, I woke to the sound of her humming. Not a song I knew. Not one I'd heard. But soft, gentle, like she was trying to remember what peace used to sound like. It broke something in me, and it built something new. You can smell death before it arrives. It's not blood, not rot. It's older than that, quieter. Like dust soaked in sweat, like the breath of something that's been hiding too long. I smelled it the morning they came. We'd barely finished nailing the last of the window boards when the first buzzards circled overhead. They always know. I stepped onto the porch just as the sun broke over the ridge. The valley below shimmered in gold, beautiful in a way that felt cruel. Too calm, too quiet, no wind, not a single leaf dared move. Then I saw them. 4 riders at first, coming from the east, slow and steady, not trying to sneak, not bothering to hide. These were the scoutsmen sent to test the waters, not start the war. She joined me at the door, rifle in hand, wrapped in a canvas coat far too big for her. Her eyes didn't blink. She didn't ask if I was ready. She just stood there, waiting. I nodded, more to myself than to her, and stepped off the porch. I walked halfway down the trail, rifle slung behind me. My hands were empty, palms open. If they wanted to shoot a man walking with peace, they'd show their color before the sun reached the fence line. They didn't shoot. The 4 of them pulled up 10 paces out. The one in front had a scar from jaw to temple, twisted like lightning across his face, wore a black duster and silver spurs, far too clean for someone who'd earned them. "You're Caleb?" he asked. I didn't answer. Don't much look like a killer. Still, I said nothing. He tilted his head. Royce wants the girl. He gets her, you keep your land, your life, your peace. Refuse? He let the sentence hang like a noose. Then he grinned. We light the fuse. I looked past him at the men behind. One had a shotgun slung low. The others looked nervous boys playing soldier, hoping their bluff held long enough for backup. I stepped forward, slow. Saw his hand twitch toward his holster. Then I spoke. I buried 8 graves behind that house. You think I won't make room for 4 more? His grin twitched. Just a little. But it was enough. They turned and rode off. Dust trailing like a promise. We had half a day before the real ones came. I spent it wiring the porch rails with tripline, nailing planks into spikes, and stacking sandbags in the barn loft for cover. She stayed in the cellar, packing the ledger copy tighter in the jar, sealing it with wax and wrapping it in oilcloth again and again. When she came up, she carried the weight of a tombstone in her arms. She said, "If I don't make it, don't let them find this." I didn't say a word. I took the ledger and hid it behind a loose brick near the hearth. Then I handed her a key. For what? She asked. For the shed. Her eyes widened. The one with the supplies? I nodded. Before she could say more, a distant horn sounded from the ridge. It was time. They arrived quickly. Dust rose in the air, horses carrying men in worn clothes, serious faces, steady hands. She was already in position inside the barn, watching carefully through the slats. I stayed hidden by the porch, close to the barrels. The first shot came before I saw them clearly. It wasn't mine. It was hers. One man pulled back suddenly, losing balance and falling hard to the ground. The others spread out, returning fire, making noise around the barn and porch. But they didn't notice the wire on the ground. The third man stepped on it, and suddenly an explosion sent him and his horse stumbling. Shouts followed. Confusion filled the air. Their shots became less precise. That's when I stepped out. I acted quickly, stopping 2 more before they could get steady. The rest tried to find shelter, but there was none nearby. One tried to ride up the path near the chicken coop, but she stopped him with a clear shot. Then, silence. Smoke drifted upward. One horse ran off. 2 men crawled slowly toward the rocks. That's when I saw him. Royce. He hadn't come with the first group. He arrived alone, riding calmly. No weapon visible, just a pale horse and steady eyes. His gaze met mine. No words, just a silent stare. Then he turned and rode away. They didn't return that day. We buried the fallen behind the coop, away from the water. No markers, just earth and quiet. She stayed there longer than I expected. Not sad, thoughtful. They were young, she said quietly. He sent them out without a second thought. I nodded. I knew then this was far from over. Royce wasn't after the ledger. He was after her, and he wouldn't stop. That night, we stayed awake. No rest. Candles flickered while she read aloud from the ledger. Line by line, name by name. Names tied to bribes, false sales, missing men, and corrupted law. Royce's name stamped repeatedly. Proof enough to bring him down. She looked fierce, ink-stained hands, eyes sharp with fire. No fear left, only determination. And I felt it too. Silence often means calm. But sometimes, it's just the pause before a storm. That night, it was the latter. She sat by the fire, ledger open, tracing every truth. I watched the dark trees outside. The next morning, I saw the first sign. A red X painted thickly across the front gate. Not there before. No sounds of footsteps or horses. Just that mark and unmistakable warning. She didn't react aloud. Just closed the ledger and changed clothes. I watched her braid her hair tightly, tie it back, and sling her old rifle over her shoulder like it was part of her. We both understood. Royce's threats were now open. They came again. Not wild outlaws this time. Clean shirts, long coats, polished boots. Men sent by the law. Their leader rode a white horse, unarmed as far as I could tell. But power was clear in his stance, his voice, his air of control. He didn't introduce himself. Just walked to the porch. Looked at me like I owed him. "You're hiding stolen property," he said. "You have 24 hours to hand it over." I stared back. I said. He nodded. "She has something that doesn't belong to her." I leaned on the porch post. "She's not an object." He just smiled. 24 hours, he said again. "After that, this land becomes a fire line." And then he walked away, as if that was the end. It wasn't. That night, we made our choice. She pulled the ledger pages apart and fed them to the flames one by one, but not before copying every detail onto 2 separate sheets, each sealed, wrapped, and tucked into hollow rifle stocks. One went with her, one with me. If we died, truth wouldn't. We loaded saddlebags with cartridges, jerky, 2 water skins, and a tin of matches. No photos, no letters, nothing worth mourning. Just what could save us or kill them. We didn't speak much. Didn't need to. She touched my shoulder once, light as dust, then climbed to the loft, to sleep for what hours we had left. I sat by the coals and waited for dawn. When it came, the world felt hollow. Birds stayed quiet. Even the horses were uneasy. By mid-morning, smoke curled on the horizon. Not from fire, but from the engines. They brought wagons now, steel-bound with barred windows. Not to kill. To take. To cage. Royce wasn't interested in corpses. He wanted submission. They rolled up the valley trail like a funeral procession. 20 men, 2 wagons. The man in white at the center. And at least 4 of them wore marshal badges, false as everything else pinned to Royce's chest. I saw it in her face. They were going to bury us in paper and fire. We made our stand on the ridge. I placed the Winchester over the rocks, watching their approach through the cracked scope. She crouched behind the stump, lining up her sights without a word. We had 6 sticks of dynamite left. 3 wired to the posts, 2 under the trail, and 1 strapped to the back gate. If they wanted her, they'd have to walk through hell. They stopped 100 yards out. He stepped down, boots crunching like bones. "I don't want to hurt you," he called up the ridge, "but I will." I stood. "You already have." He sighed like I was disappointing him. Then he nodded. They opened fire. We returned it. My first shot clipped the lead wagon's wheel, sending it sideways into a ditch. She hit a man square in the neck. He dropped without a sound. Then came the thunder. The dynamite wired under the trail roared to life, tossing a rider end over end into the brush. Screams, smoke, chaos. But they kept coming. Organized, trained. Not the same fools from before. I moved to the right flank, dropped 2 more, ducked behind a log as bullets chewed the bark beside my ear. She ran low, took cover behind the rocks. I saw her bleeding. Left shoulder, not bad. But she was slowing. We were losing ground. 10 men still standing. They pushed forward. The man in white stayed behind. Watching. Always watching. I dropped my last shell into the chamber. Took aim. Fired. Another down. But then I saw it. Behind them, cutting through the trees. A second wave. Horsemen in black. 20, maybe more. Royce wasn't just coming to kill us. He was coming to erase us. I looked at her. Blood down her arm, smoke in her eyes. And she nodded. That was all. She ran, back toward the house, toward the gate, toward the shed. I covered her the best I could. Then the sky cracked open. A scream of light and dust and fury as the final charge went off behind us. They stopped. The second wave didn't. They rode straight into fire. But it didn't matter anymore. The back gate exploded. The shed lit up. And in that chaos, I saw her, running, staggering, rifle in one hand, the ledger in the other. And Royce standing still, unmoving, as if he knew, as if he always knew. And then, it was just ash and dust. And silence, again. I don't remember the blast itself, just the aftermath. Just the taste of earth in my mouth and the distant ringing in my ears, like a church bell rung one too many times. I opened my eyes to a gray sky, heavy with smoke and grief. The world was sideways, and I couldn't feel my right arm. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd died. But death, I figured, didn't smell like burning pine and copper blood. The ridge was gone, flattened. The trail where they had come, once so proud and orderly, was now scattered with twisted metal and bodies, some moving, most not. One of the wagons had flipped, wheels still spinning like they hadn't accepted the end yet. And in the middle of it all, Royce's men were regrouping, like roaches after a boot. I tried to stand. Pain bloomed sharp and wild in my side. Rips, maybe, or worse. I crawled instead, hands clawing at the dirt, dragging my weight toward the last place I'd seen her, toward the blackened gate and what was left of the shed. She wasn't there, just scorched earth and a faint trail of blood leading into the woods. She ran, smart, braver than me. I followed, or tried. Every breath felt like sandpaper, every step like dragging chains. But I moved, slow and stupid, with nothing left in my chest but the stubborn fire of not letting her die alone. I stumbled through the trees, past roots and thorns and the ghosts of men we'd just killed. And always, that faint smear of red, like breadcrumbs laid in desperation. The forest swallowed the smoke, but not the fear. Something in the air had shifted. Not just the smell of burning oil or gunpowder. Something colder, darker, the kind of stillness that meant Royce wasn't done yet. I found her by the creek, kneeling, face spotted, eyes wide but unfocused. The ledger was still clutched to her chest like a holy book, and her left arm hung useless at her side. She didn't flinch when I approached, didn't cry, just looked up at me and said, quiet as wind, "I can't run anymore." And she couldn't. I could see it. Her leg was cut deep, blood soaking through the makeshift wrap. We both knew it was over. Not the fight, but the running. I knelt beside her, and for a long moment we just sat, breathing shallow, watching the water pass like it might carry the guilt away. Then I took her hand, cold, but still gripping the ledger, and I looked her in the eyes. "If they take you," I said, "they don't just get the gold. They get the story." She nodded. And then she did something I didn't expect. She smiled. Not a big one. Not joyful. But the kind of smile you give when you've already decided. "I buried a copy," she whispered. 2 miles north, in the stone tree. I stared at her. She leaned in. "If they kill me, find it. Burn their world down." Then she handed me the pages and reached for the revolver in my belt. I didn't stop her. Couldn't. She cocked the hammer and laid back against the roots, the gun on her stomach like some twisted offering. "If it comes to it," she said, "I'll do it myself." I shook my head. "You won't have to." But I knew I might be lying. They found us an hour later. Royce himself didn't come. Silvard. He sent his dogs instead. 4 of them. Polished boots, tight grips, hollow eyes. They shouted orders as if we might surrender. She didn't move. Neither did I. Then one of them fired. "Warning shot," he claimed. But it hit close. Too close. I raised my hands. Slow. Deliberate. Let them see I was empty. Let them think I was broken. And when the closest one stepped forward to disarm her, I moved. Fast. Desperate. I bumped into him, managed to take his weapon, then reacted quickly. I aimed carefully and made my move. The situation got messy fast. Things happened too quickly to follow every detail. I fell hard, hurt, but still conscious. She acted fast, steady hands, no hesitation. People went down around us, but not everyone. One managed to retreat, weak and struggling. I dragged myself over to her. She was breathing hard, not from the chaos, but something deeper. Her injury was serious, bleeding more than before. I pressed my hand gently, feeling the warmth slowly fading. Her hand covered mine. "I'm tired," she said softly. "I understand," I replied. She looked up, eyes steady. "Will you see this through?" she asked. I nodded. She closed her eyes. For a moment, I feared the worst. But then she whispered, "Tell them everything." That was the last thing she said. I buried her by the creek, under a tree. No marker, just a simple stone I placed. One word, free. Then I took the ledger and moved on, not running away, but seeking the truth. For days they searched for me. With relentless determination, I kept moving. Injuries healed, mind sharpened. At last, I found the place. A tree split by lightning. Inside its roots, wrapped carefully, the truth, her father's journal, maps, names, receipts, proof of corruption and hidden crimes, Royce's name stamped many times, and a letter, written by her, unto whoever would listen. She told the story, not just about the mine, but the fear, the silence, the pain held inside for years, and hope that justice would find her. That night, I left the past behind, burned the old cabin, then headed east, toward town still blinded by Royce's shadow, but carrying her story, because stories like hers don't die. They become legends, and legends can change everything. So they dragged a boy, barely 13, into the dirt beside me and put a gun to his head. "Where is it?" the captain asked. I looked into the boy's eyes, then into the captain's, and I told him, I already mailed it east, to the courts, to the Pinkertons, to the Herald. He stared at me, eyes narrowing. "You're lying, maybe." He kicked me once more for good measure, but he didn't shoot. Not the boy, not me. Because even cowards know that too much blood draws flies, and flies draw attention. They left me there, bleeding, broken, but alive. And that was their mistake. Because I rose that night, climbed from the dirt and walked back into town, limping on a splinted leg and fury burning behind my eyes. The people saw me, and this time they didn't look away. They followed, not with guns, but with silence. With faces full of questions they'd never dared ask. I led them to the center of town, and I spoke, not loud, not fast, just steady, clear, truth. I read from her father's journal. I showed them the signatures, the payments, the deaths masked as accidents. I read her letter, every word. I told them about the creek, the ledger, the girl who never stopped running until she bled the truth into my hands. And I watched the fires spread. One by one, men and women stepped forward. A brother who lost his sister to a mining collapse. A mother whose son vanished after joining Royce's payroll. A former deputy who knew too much and drank to forget. They spoke, and others listened. And something shifted. The town once ruled by fear found its voice. By dawn, they were marching, not just in Hollow Creek, but across every settlement Royce had ever touched. They tore down his signs, burned his contracts, dug up his graves. I heard stories of men riding all night to warn others, of women copying pages by candlelight, of children carrying messages faster than horses. The truth had no reins now, no master. It had become a wildfire, and in its path, Royce's empire began to crumble. But he didn't go quietly. No, the devil rarely does. He set fire to his own estate, tried to burn the evidence before it reached the courts. He sent mercenaries after me, men with no names and too many scars. He offered gold for my head, and when that failed, he ran like a coward, like the men he used to mock. They say he fled south, to the border, disguised as a preacher, claimed he was just a man of God fleeing persecution. But the bounty posters bore his face, and the people remembered. I don't know who caught him, maybe a Pinkerton, Maybe some widow with a long memory and a steady hand. But one morning, months after the fire, they found his body hanging from a cottonwood tree outside Redemption Gulch. No trial, no ceremony, just justice. Simple and final. As for me, I stayed in Hollow Creek long enough to see the church rebuilt. Watch them plant flowers by the creek. Watch them carve her name into stone. Not her real one. She never gave it to me. But the one she earned. Hope. I never spoke again to crowds. Never wrote a word for the papers. But sometimes, at dusk, I ride past the stone tree. Sit in the shade. Close my eyes. And listen. To the wind. To her voice. To the truth that still echoes through ash and dust. And I remember. Legends aren't born. They're built. One truth at a time. The town had changed. I could feel it in the quiet. Not the fearful kind, like a predator circling unseen. No, this was the kind that came after a storm, when the sky holds its breath and the land waits for what comes next. Hollow Creek had seen fire, blood, and reckoning, and now it stood still, balancing on the edge of something new. Not redemption, not yet, but something close enough to reach for. The morning I decided to ride back to the canyon, I woke before the sun, before the birds, before even the wind found its voice. The house we'd taken shelter in, the one near the dry well, was barely holding together now. One of the beams had collapsed in the storm, and rain had eaten through the roof, but I hadn't touched it. Couldn't bring myself to fix it. It felt like tampering with a memory that still breathed. The twins were gone now. Not dead, no, not that, just gone from me. Taken in by a family west of Ridge Hollow. Good people. A woman and her brother who'd lost their own in the fever 3 winters ago. They didn't ask questions. Didn't need to. They saw the girls, and something inside them healed enough to open its arms again. I left them there, with the small tin necklace she'd once worn, her only possession, when I found her in the desert, and I never looked back. It was better that way. Safer. The kind of safety she had died for. The canyon called to me like a ghost with unfinished business. Every hoofbeat on that dry trail felt like a heartbeat pulled from the past. The land hadn't forgotten every ridge, every crevice, every whisper of wind against the stone remembered who we had been and what we had buried. The place where I first held her broken body in my arms, where I thought she was dead, where she should have been. But fate had other plans, and I wasn't done listening. I reached the ridge at noon. The sun hung directly above me like the eye of God, too bright to ignore, too silent to comfort. I dismounted, let the horse wander, and stood where the earth had first cracked beneath my boots all those weeks ago. The same patch of dust, the same wind, the same weight behind my ribs. I took the journal from my coat, the real one. Not the copies, not the forgeries, the pages her father had written in blood and ink, now nearly faded to time. I flipped through it slowly, not looking for answers, just remembering the journey that brought me here. The betrayal, the burnings, the silence of the dead, and the woman who'd carried it all like it was hers to bear alone. She hadn't been just a victim of Royce. She'd been his witness, his mirror, his reckoning. She could have vanished. Could have disappeared across the border and let the world keep turning. But she stayed. She fought. And she died trying to light a match in a world drenched in oil. I buried the journal beneath the stone tree at the canyon's edge, the same spot where I once tried to bury her. I wrapped it in oilskin and twine, sealed it with wax, and pressed my palm against the rock like I was pressing it against her spine. "This was yours," I whispered. "Always was." I stayed until the sun touched the western ridgeline and the shadows swallowed half the canyon. Then I lit a fire, not for warmth, for signal. And I waited, because I knew they'd come. Not Royce's men, not bounty hunters. Them, the ones she'd written about in the final pages of the ledger. The ones who owned the railroads behind the land. The ones whose names never appeared in any courthouse but echoed in every contract. Every mine, every shallow grave from here to California. The men who sent Royce. The men who sent the men who sent him. She'd left more than truth behind. She'd left threat, and power doesn't forget threats. I heard them before I saw them. Two horses, leather saddles, no creek, no spurs, no light. They rode up to the fire like they were part of the smoke itself, and when they dismounted, I didn't reach for my gun. Because it wouldn't have mattered. They weren't there to kill me. They were there to buy me. The taller one spoke first. Calm voice. Soft like silk stretched over something rotten. You're the one who started this mess. I didn't answer. He pulled a small black envelope from his coat. Thicker than it looked. Heavy. We believe in clean endings. I looked at the envelope. Then at him. You already got your ending, I said. He smiled without warmth. You misunderstand. This isn't a threat. It's an opportunity. For what? To forget. To walk away. To take your silence and spend it somewhere far from here. We'll fix the rest. Quietly. Discreetly. Like Hollow Creek? I asked. His smile vanished. I leaned in, close enough to smell the copper on his breath. I buried the journal, I said. But not the fire. He blinked, and for the first time, I saw it. Fear. Just a flicker. But it was there. I let it hang in the air between us like a noose. Tell your masters, I said. The West remembers. They left without another word. No threats. No bribes. No bullets. Just dust in their wake. Because they knew. Knew the stories had already taken root. Knew they couldn't kill a ghost twice. And she had become one. Not the haunting kind. The kind that watches. That waits. That whispers from every scorched rail and blood-soaked contract. The kind of ghost that builds legends. I rode back under the stars. Didn't stop for water. Didn't look behind. And when I reached the edge of Hollow Creek again, I saw candles in the windows. Dozens of them. One in every house. Not for me. For her. For what she gave. For what they now refuse to forget. They called her by different names. The Desert Bride. The Orange Angel. The Mother of Ashes. But I knew better. She wasn't just a martyr. She was the first match. And now the fire was ours. One more part called it. I never believed in saints. Not in the pews. Not in the stories the old women whispered over soup bones and fevered children. I believed in grit. In bleeding knuckles. In the way a man looked at you just before he pulled the trigger. But now, riding the same trail that had once nearly killed us both, I understand that maybe sainthood wasn't about miracles or halos. Maybe it was about a woman, half dead in the desert, who chose to keep going anyway. The sky was burning orange as I crested the final hill outside Hollow Creek. That same wind that once tore my coat from my back now moved like a whisper, gentle, reverent. Below me, the town breathed different now, less like a wound, more like a scar. Not healed, not yet, but closed over at least. A place where something new might grow. They had rebuilt part of the chapel. Strange, considering most of the folks here hadn't bowed their heads in decades. But there it was, whitewashed walls, clean wooden beams, and a bell that rang each dusk like it was counting the living, not mourning the dead. They'd named it after her. No cross. No saintly iconography. Just a single wooden carving nailed over the arch. The woman who walked back. That was all they needed to say. I rode through town slow, hat pulled low, coat heavier than ever despite the warm air. No one called out to me, no children waved, but they watched. Not with fear, not even with awe, just understanding, like they knew what I carried, like they'd carried it too. At the far end of the town stood the train station, rebuilt, polished, rails gleaming. Trains didn't stop there anymore, not for passengers, only for shipments, or, mostly, and paper. Boxes of records being moved out by some new company that claimed it would bring prosperity back to the West. I knew better. The name on the side of the crates, Marrow Consolidated, was just another mask for the same devils. But it didn't matter anymore. Not really. Because the fire had already spread. I'd made sure of it. See, the journal wasn't the only thing she'd left behind. In those weeks before she died, while her voice still cracked with pain and her fingers barely worked, she'd dictated everything to me. Every ledger entry, every name, every number. I wrote it all down on fresh parchment, made copies, dozens of them, stashed them in stagecoaches, sent them west with drifters and east with barkeeps, gave them to women with hollow eyes and men with broken spines. She hadn't been fighting for vengeance. She'd been building an army, not of guns, but of truth. And truth, when spoken in enough tongues, becomes something heavier than law. It becomes legend. Royce never got a grave. They say a coyote dragged his body out past the edge of the gulch. No one mourned him. No one even marked the spot. He died as he lived, forgotten by the ones he hurt, remembered only by the silence he left behind. As for the men above him, the ones in marble offices with hands too clean, they started to vanish. Quietly. One by one. Accidents, illnesses, lost in storms that never made the papers. The kind of justice that wears no badge and needs no jury. She would have hated that kind of justice. But I think she would have understood. I stayed long enough to see the new school open. A one-room place with a crooked chimney and a roof that leaked every time it rained. But it was theirs, and it stood. And when I saw one of the twins, little Lena, step through that door, carrying a book too heavy for her hands, I knew my part was over. They wouldn't remember me in a few years. The man who brought them out of the dust, who held the woman when she shook with fever, who buried the truth beneath a canyon and watched the fire climb. But they'd remember her, and that was enough. I left Hollow Creek without ceremony. No goodbyes. No final looks. I rode east until the desert turned to hills, and the hills to plains, and the air stopped tasting like memory. In time, I stopped riding altogether. Took up work mending fences, fixing wheels, sleeping beneath stars that didn't judge or whisper. But at night, when the fire burned low and the coyotes cried somewhere just out of sight, I still saw her, standing in that orange dress, wind in her hair, firelight in her eyes. Not broken, not gone. Reason? Not in body, but in every woman who refused to kneel, in every child who dared to ask why, in every man who chose truth over silence, even when it cost him everything. That's what she gave us. Not peace, but permission to begin again, to walk forward, to rebuild. And I, the man who thought he'd been saving her all along, had only ever been her witness. I'm not a hero. I'm not even a good man. But I was there, when the West cracked open and bled, when the fire found its spark. And I'll carry that story hers, not mine, until the day the dust finally takes me. Because some stories aren't meant to end. They're meant to echo forever. If you were in his place, would you have fought the same fight? Share your thoughts with us down in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to leave a like. It helps more than you know. There's more where this came from. Explore the other stories on screen now. One of them might just stay with you forever.